Hey everybody, Jonathan Broadbent here, your host of UnWoke.Academy. Welcome to another live episode. We are live on 4 different platforms right now. So if you have any thoughts, comments, questions, concerns, or otherwise, feel free to drop them in the comments. I should see those. And barring a few exceptions, I'll try to incorporate your comments into my comments today. I'm not even going to call it a show because here's the deal. My plan today is to kind of lift the curtain a little bit and talk briefly about the area of expertise where I have a career focus. Sorry, I'm closing screens here so that I'm less whitewashed. Um, I've actually have 5 screens, 5 monitors on with white background. They tend to wash me out. So I wanted to have the best experience for you. So I closed some screens. Anyway, I am here's the deal. We're going to pull back the curtain just for a minute and look at an area of finance that you're probably not exposed to, or if you are, you're kind of seeing the other side of it. And I think it may help you to get some perspective. And certainly it gets some perspective on UnWoke.Academy, how we got to where we are, and the plans for where we go from here. You've heard me talk probably in the past, if you've watched prior episodes, about things like a you've heard me talk about 401k plans and their design, the administration of workplace retirement plans. That, in a nutshell, is where I focus. That's the underpinnings and the whole origin of the company that I founded, Plan Partners. Plan Partners it came out of what's called third party administration many, many years ago. And yes, you can see all these gray hairs. I like to say that they're earned. These are earned gray hairs because I have several decades now of experience in plan administration. If you have taken any pre law or any accounting courses or those sorts of things, or gotten into investments in the institutional side at all, you've probably heard the term ERISA. I'm an ERISA subject matter expert. I've been doing it for long enough that I'm now counted among, I would estimate, around 30 people in the country with the level of focus and expertise that I have. I've done education and training sessions all over the country, crisscrossing from Southern California to Northern Connecticut down into Georgia and Florida, and most places in between for many, many years. Well, that factors in because that is what gave me the access to talk to a lot of those institutional managers that I've been telling you about for going on 4 years now. I'm tongue tied all of a sudden. Hold on a second. I'm going to take a sip of my water. That will help. So I, from doing that and working at the state level on some pretty big stuff, and back in the day when I was working on and for Wall Street, I was routinely invited in to work on some big projects. Some of them you've probably read about or may have read about in major publications, and they affect the administration of entire states within our union. Things that are kind of off radar for a lot of people. Bear with me, by the way. This will come back around to how this affects you. But there are things that are kind of similar to 401k plans, or 457 and thrift saving plans and Taft-Hartley and all that stuff. So that's kind of the nerdy side of finance, which goes to the ongoing surprise that I have, that just due to circumstances, I was encouraged to start this podcast. And now, surprisingly, for somebody who's has worked for so many years in an area of finance that's mostly off radar for most, suddenly we launched UnWoke.Academy, and we're now over 21 million views. And thank you, by the way. We greatly appreciate your patronage and coming back to watch these episodes. But it occurred to me that there's a piece of the puzzle that I don't really talk about, because for the most part, people like you who are listening most often don't have the the um, the exposure and the underpinnings to really talk about things like the administration of workplace retirement plans, but it does factor in. You've heard me talk about self-directed brokerage accounts, and that's a big part of where I want to head today, and the reason for them and how they work and their proper administration. So bear with me. I'm going to work through a couple of things, and hopefully this resonates. And again, by the way, if you are watching this live, feel free to add some questions or comments, because here's the thing: while a lot of what I do and have done for many decades now is not immediately on radar for people, it does affect you. And that's, to me, one of the key pieces that I constantly, not occasionally, not sometimes, constantly keep front of mind, is that the decisions that we make, the answers I bring, the analytics that we discuss, the designs that we consider all affect you. They affect the working American. And that ranges from, I've had the great honor and pleasure of having been involved in some very high level decisions about how the United States is permitted to, or permits employers to run workplace retirement plans. So, just to keep things simple and easy and digestible, I'm going to use the term 401k in a sort of a blanket way. It could mean any number of things. And there are, yeah, I mean, no disrespect to our friends in education and healthcare and nonprofit who have a sister type of a program called 403B. As a side note, you should tune in and let's engage in some discussion about 403B1 versus 403B7. I was actually there for the beginnings at 403B7 and helped to orchestrate and train the nation on how that rolled out. But anyway, that's a side note. There's me being I'm a technical geek for these things. I've spent decades memorizing and learning about the facets and components of these things. But at the end of the day, for many, many years, I think here's the way I suggest you look at the role of people like me. Once or several times a year, I'm invited in, typically by the board of directors for a company. And human resources, the CFO, the CEO, all the leadership team are typically sitting around the table and have discussion about your workplace retirement plan. What's working, what's not, what changes are uh, pending or suitable, what could be done differently to drive better experience and outcome for individuals. That includes everything from the stuff that you'll see pretty immediately, like evaluating the providers, to a lot of stuff that you may only indirectly be aware of, like the integration with other providers. There are, and that's actually a great area. It's, for me, it's kind of an exciting area of focus on integrating with things like payroll. So if you've been around long enough to have had a 401k plan for a while, where there used to be sort of a manual process of taking some of your money out and putting it into the 401k, and then separately you would get a paycheck or eventually a direct deposit. Direct deposit is probably most typical now, but the years ago, systems were set up that allowed those computers to talk to each other, your 401k plan and your payroll. So now lots of really cool stuff can happen very efficiently. If you wanted to change, for instance, your contribution rate, let's say you get a raise, and for your sake, I hope that you do, and I hope it's a big one. And you decide, because you got a raise, you've got a little bit more disposable income now, so you're going to increase your contribution rate from 5% to 6% or whatever. You can do that very easily now. It used to be you'd go into the human resources office and fill out a form, and then they would submit it. They would manually enter it, and it was a drag. It was a time-consuming drag on human resources. Well, now it's really become very self-service allowing you to go into a computer web-based site, make the change, and it all happens and flows through, and it communicates, it should, with payroll. So the next time you get a pay stub, your deduction that go into your 401k plan is managed appropriately. That's a big part of the sorts of things that people like me do and have been for decades. And if we do our jobs well, it's understandable. We're kind of behind the scenes and we should be. That's our mission, is to try to make it smooth and as invisible and understandable and user intuitive as possible. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But there's a lot that goes on connected with that. For instance, if you've ever been with a company or heard about or read about a company that does an evaluation of their matching, if your company does matching, sometimes they will assess the effectiveness of that match, and they may do something called a stretch match, or they may go to a type of match that's referred to as a safe harbor. By the way, if any of these terms are unfamiliar to you, I really encourage you to do some web searches, because it certainly can't hurt to know about these sorts of things. And yes, it does all get to a point that I want to make about UnWoke.Academy. In addition to self-directed brokerage account, it's a big part of the perspective that I have that led me to be interested in starting UnWoke.Academy. Because I still firmly believe if I had been more of a typical financial advisor focused on individuals, like trying to get your IRA rollover or you and your spouse's savings account or whatever, that I think lends itself to a different perspective. I don't mean to disparage my friends on the what we refer to it as retail, on the retail side, but being institutional and being so focused on so many lives, I would have no way of counting now, hundreds of thousands of lives. The decisions that I've helped lead have affected over hundreds of thousands across probably most every state in the union, or maybe every state. That, to me, is kind of a sacred duty. It's it is it is not one off. It's not an individual or family. Oftentimes, I'm consulting with a group or talking to a group of people around a boardroom table, and the decisions we make may affect tens of thousands of lives in an instant, just like that, like changing the matching formula. And then there's a lot that kind of comes off of that, like how do we manage education? Um, what are are the integrations set up efficiently to capture that change, and what notices need to be made? How do we need to notify the providers? Are the providers capable of it? And then there's all sorts of other things that we do on a regular, ongoing basis to make the plan the most efficient and best that it can be. Well, here's where the rubber meets the road. And here's where I start to have a beef with some other types of financial advisors who don't have a focus in this space. At the end of the day, there are providers out there, and I'm going to ask you to think of one. Just pick one in your mind. Any of the major financial firms out there, most all of them offer 401ks and things like them. Imagine them for a moment. Their mission, they won't say it, but their objective is to provide the least required services for the highest fee possible. And most often, when they are invited in, they will bid an appropriate fee structure. They may have, let's call it 100 different services they may offer for the 4K, like integration. They can do they can send the notices out, those kinds of things. But they're, from a profit and loss standpoint, they're better off if they provide very little service at a very high fee. So that's where they start to get creative and put embedded fees in lots of different places all throughout the plan. And they may not talk openly with human resources and the CFO and the CEO and the leadership team of the company about what's available, what the services are that they could be providing. And here's a little side note, and this is a little bit on the nerdy side, admittedly, but if you're in human resources, it'll click. There are some protective services that they can offer, many providers offer, that do what are called 316 operations, which is making sure that the thing stays compliant on a regular basis. That's kind of my easiest path to in a nutshell, describe 316. Um, but understanding that these providers out there benefit from offering plans with high fees and very little service, it means that a lot of the service gets stuck in the human resources office, and unnecessarily high fees are deducted from your accounts. That's the key that I want to get to. When you have a 401k plan, and again, this of course applies to 457, thrift, and the public employee retirement systems. Oh my gosh, don't even get me started with those. I've done examinations of several, and we should doge those plans absolutely. If you have a union plan, if you're a teacher, 403b, if you're a nonprofit, those are often loaded with unnecessary fees. The reason they get there is the retail brethren, the retail folks, not knowing the difference and not knowing how to advocate properly on behalf of the individual. So there's that perspective thing. When I talk about having spent decades with the knowledge on my shoulder that I have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of lives, and their future happiness and benefit and their beneficiaries and their retirement hanging on the decisions that we make, I have made a career choice in advocating nonstop and constantly for the best thing I can find, which is the exact opposite of what the providers want. The providers, I work with pretty much all of them, and I have for years. And I will say that just because there's so much money out there, the $35.7 trillion estimated in retirement plans. They will, of course, play nice with me and companies like mine. As a side note, I will tell you one of the major providers out there, I'm not going to name them by name, not in this conversation at least, but I was actually invited in to do what I do for an energy company some years ago. And one of the first things I noticed is the energy company, well, actually, let me correct that. The energy company was not paying 11 basis points. The employees of the energy company were being assessed a fee. The fee is called, it's expressed in terms of basis points, which means a fraction of a percent. It was 11 basis points, which is a little bit more than a tenth of a percent. Every year, it just constantly, every time there were deductions, it was just sort of skimming off the top of all the retirement savings. So if the investment returns for people's choices inside of that retirement plan did 1%, what the employees realized is about 9/10 of 1% every year, ongoing. And when we were invited in to do the examination, we were given all the authorization to go in and conduct a review. And interestingly, before we took even a single step, the first thing that happened is a letter was sent by that provider out to the energy company, alerting them that the 11 basis points were now henceforward waived. They dropped the 11 basis points. That speaks, I took that as a nice compliment and a feather in our cap, that we didn't even have to act yet, and they waived the 11 basis points. But it's a clear indication of what's possible when you focus on the individual, when you focus on the beneficiaries, the people, the workers, our great American men and women who serve in a job capacity, who are saving for retirement. That to me is an honor and a privilege to work on their behalf. And we do that often, advocating for the highest possible services with the lowest possible fees. On the other side of the equation, when you talk to individuals, and there might be really any number of things, there are some accountants that sell. I'm air quoting that they sell 401k plans or simple plans or SEP. There used to be SAR-SEP back in the day, but those don't exist anymore. Or a bank rep or an insurance agent, or lots of people sort of sell 401k plans, and they don't know these things. A long time ago, I tried to always give everybody the benefit of the doubt and just assume that they too maybe were duped by the providers. But there's been so much information and so much push, really going back to July of 2012 when fee disclosure requirements were initiated by the Department of Labor, that I don't think anybody can plead ignorance anymore. Uh, Everybody should know that the every effort should be made to keep the fees as low as possible in those retirement savings accounts, and that the services should be the best possible. I still find some very, very large plans, and it's mystifying to me. I find these companies, sometimes really large, in the hundreds of thousands of employees all over the country, who are saddled with these massive fees. And then I look at their processes and they're really slow, which means that you, as an individual, as an employee of that type of company, you may have a question or problem or issue, and it may take a long period of time to get an answer to that. That's why. That's the reason, because the big high fees are subtracted. It also means, and this gets to the heart of the root of the matter in effective retirement savings and what's referred to as deficiencies. So you have gaps in how prepared people are. Well, imagine 30 plus years of you working with, let's call it 10, a tenth of a percent or half a percent, or even a full percent more every year compounding. That is a huge difference. In some worlds, in some circumstances, that's referred to as unfunded liability. I know I'm throwing out a lot of terms. Consider these breadcrumbs. This is recorded. You can go back. Welcome. It looks like we've got some new guests on a few different platforms. Hopefully you'll go back and watch the beginning. From this point forward, what I have to say may not make a lot of sense. But when you get into unfunded liability, that's the difference between people's expectations in retirement and how much retirement money has been saved. Well, lots of people can talk about how they might be able to affect the stock market or may be able to pick something wisely. Nobody can for sure have a positive impact except reducing fees. That is the one known distinguishing difference. If fees can be reduced, you're better off, all other things being equal. So the same investments, not even changing the investments, those same investments, the same plan, the same match, if you have one, everything being the same, as soon as you subtract fees, as soon as you, eliminate some fees out of the plan, you're better off. So, knowing that, in 2009, I started something called fee-based 401k. And actually, if you type that in, it just redirects. I still have the domain that redirects to my company. And at Plan Partners, our thing for over a decade now, since I launched my own company, has been to go to employers and suggest that instead of allowing the fees to load up and subtract from all the employees, consider paying a direct fee to allow us to consult. on the plan. Now, this is a side note and it relates to my company, but take this and run with it. Go to your employer and suggest it. If you know people in finance, suggest the same model. I've been talking to financial advisors across the country for over a decade. Most don't like it because they don't want their fee to be, they don't want it to be transparent and understood. They like, broadly speaking, they like the fact that the fee is invisible. It's hidden. It's out of sight, out of mind. It's just sort of skimming off the top quarter by quarter, year after year. But having that, again, going back to square one, that first critical, fundamental thought process for me, what's in the best interest of the participant? The best interest, if the company can afford a flat fee, pay that advisor. Yes, I mentioned my company, but I think virtually any company out there could take this and do the exact same thing. Provide those great services to the plan. I'm going to take this in two different directions kind of simultaneously. If the company can afford it and can do it, then it's simply another professional service fee, like paying a lawyer or an accountant or having a paid board position or something. You then have an advisory role at the corporate level working on behalf of the workplace retirement plan. It's a completely different structure. That person can fill a very specific task and a role unconflicted and can do a better job. I will argue that and do regularly, as opposed to the whatever bank rep or insurance salesman or whatever, whoever stumbles in and again, I'm air quoting, sells the 401k plan and then sort of hangs out there looking to see what else can be sold and going into those education things where they can talk about investing a whole bunch of the rest of your money with them, etc. When companies take my advice and take that route, they have drawn a separation between those two roles. The retail, the individual or company that works with the employee directly, and that one person or sometimes a couple of people like plan partners who come in and simply only work for the betterment of the workplace retirement plan, doing all the assessments, doing the fiduciary due diligence, managing the file and communications. Then this is where I was headed with it. It gets kind of cool from here. That person, that group or company is free then to do all education for employees. What do I mean by that? There are some prohibitions against retail advisors because they're conflicted, because they stand to make more money working with individuals than they can working on the plan. They can be conflicted. So educational topics like rollovers, whether or not when you leave the company, you take your money and roll it over into another account somewhere outside of the 401k. A retail advisor stands to, generally speaking, almost universally, stands to make more profit to get it by getting a person to roll out. So they can't therefore go up in front of a big group of employees and educate them on the topic of rollovers. Well, somebody and a company that comes in and does only the advisory role, the consulting role at the plan level, and doesn't work with individuals can handle the whole suite of education. That's why I built the company that I did. It started as fee-based 401k, then I added fee-based 403b, and then it evolved into plan partners. If you've watched my episodes in the past and heard me talk about weaponized regulators, that is indeed the company that is now in year 4 of weaponized regulators. They've been coming after my company with an exhaustive, ridiculous 4-year examination in order to try and shut me up. That's not working. I'm fighting back, and I continue to use my voice to advocate for reason and sanity within the world of finance and fight back against woke Wall Street. Now, last thing, and then we're going to sign off for the night. That is the self-directed brokerage accounts, SDBA. I've mentioned that in the past. If you have a 401k plan, and let's say that you have a lineup of, they're typically mutual funds, and you've watched UnWoke.Academy, you see that those are steering you into a bunch of woke garbage, things that you don't like, or maybe the globalist bubble, which is probably very likely, and you decide that you want better for yourself. There are a couple of courses that you can take. Certainly, you can go into your human resources office and try and find your way into the conversation or affect the conversation that takes place around the boardroom table about the investment choices. And maybe you can bring in some better investment choices that aren't woke. In addition, or maybe as an alternative for you, you can talk to them about adding self-directed brokerage accounts if you don't already have them. Self-directed brokerage accounts really open up virtually the broad universe of all investments. There are some employers out there that are reluctant to do that because they have been told over and over again that there is added liability and they should be concerned, yada, yada. Point them toward UnWoke.Academy or call me and I'll get you information, or go online and do some research. It's not nearly the scary thing that they've been told it is. The reason in my book that employers are told that adding self-directed brokerage accounts are some scary thing and should be taboo and don't do it, they're fear-mongered into not adding self-directed brokerage, is because the people who get the fees off of the plan, all those different companies and people, the advisor, the broker, the insurance agent, whatever, all those, remember I was saying there's layers and layers of fees subtracted on an ongoing basis. When you move out of the typical plan arrangement and into self-directed brokerage account, that disappears. So you're getting money off the table. You're getting money with no management fee connected to it. Be aware, this is something worth looking into. There's a trade-off there. You will have trading costs, which are a different type of fee, but you can eliminate the management fee and you can eliminate the advisor fee or broker fee or whatever they're calling it. Those things are incredibly, incredibly worthwhile. Everybody, if you're working somewhere that has a workplace retirement plan, as a side note, an important note, if you're working somewhere that doesn't have one, encourage them to add it. They may not know, and you may not know, there's actually a tax credit for the first 3 years to add a 401k or something like it. They can get a tax credit, or should be eligible, I would assume. Most every small employer out there that doesn't have a 401k plan is eligible. Add the thing, get it started, and advocate for self-directed brokerage account, because then the stuff that we talk about, and we've had some people on that have been great guests that are money managers, portfolio managers, you can go and find them. Now imagine the whole broad universe of different investments. You're not stuck with that little list of probably woke and in the bubble sorts of mutual funds. You can go beyond those and get into the world's your oyster. You can invest in virtually anything. So that's what I wanted to cover today. A little behind the curtains glimpse of what happens in the world of retirement plan administration. There's more to it, but I was hoping, and hopefully this hit the mark for you, to keep it kind of at a high level and bite-sized and understandable. As I said, if there are questions, feel free to add in the comments or contact us. You can contact info@unwokeinvesting.com or find us on social media and add to the comments. We'll try and get answers to you. This is Jonathan Broadbent. This has been another episode of UnWoke.Academy. Thanks for listening.